Good evening, everyone. We're so excited that you have joined us again for another webinar from Columbia Pediatrics and our External Affairs team. I'm Dr. Edith Bracho-Sanchez. I am one of the primary care pediatricians. I lead our External Affairs team, and I have an amazing panel of experts with me this evening from both Columbia University as well as the American Academy of Pediatrics. I'm going to introduce them in just a second while we wait for everyone to join this evening. I do want to tell you about a couple exciting things. One of them being our social media. Just a reminder, we're on Instagram and Facebook at Kids at Columbia. We're also on LinkedIn, and we're working hard to put really good verified information on those channels. So you can definitely find us there and find information about upcoming events as well. We also have an amazing newsletter that we put together with everything that's going on at Columbia Pediatrics, and it goes out monthly. There will be a link to sign up at the recap email that we're going to send after this webinar. And excitingly we also have a date already for our next webinar, which is going to be all about early intervention. As a primary care pediatrician, I can just say that it's gotten very tricky to keep up with how to refer and how the program's working and staffing and systems. We're going to talk about all of it and how to keep navigating it as both pediatricians and parents. So we hope that you will consider registering. We're going to put a link in the chat today. And we're also going to send a link in the recap email from this evening. So let's get into it. I have an amazing panel of experts, as I mentioned. First here, I have Dr. Jenny Radeski, who is a developmental pediatrician researcher. She is a medical director at the AAP Center of Excellence on Social Media and Youth Mental Health. We also have with us Dr. Maggie Costich, who is a primary care pediatrician here at Columbia. And last but not least, we have with us Dr. Zach Blumkin, who is a senior clinical director of our faculty practice, our psychiatric faculty practice. And we always love opportunities to collaborate with our psychiatry colleagues here at Columbia. We're talking all about early childhood and media. As a reminder, leave us your questions in the Q&A, and let's get started. Jenny, I wanted to start with you, and I think a very grounding place to start, perhaps maybe, if you can give us a little bit of a sense of how media use, especially in early childhood, has changed over the past decade or so.
You know, what's so interesting is I started researching this topic in 2011. So it was a few years after the iPhone came out and right after the iPad came out. And what has been so different is trying to parent around mobile devices and all of these interactive apps or streaming services or YouTube. It's really a different ball game than trying to parent around TV. There's a couple of reasons why. One is a lot of us grew up with like TV. So we know kind of how to set those limits. Or I grew up like couldn't wait to go watch Saturday morning cartoons, on my frigid family room every Saturday morning. Now kids don't need to like wait and make an appointment for their favorite cartoons, right? It's on demand. They can grab it at any time. It's such a pleasurable activity. There's so many fun little games and cute little YouTube videos that kids just eat it up and they want more and more of it sometimes. So, and then when it's handheld, it sometimes is harder to co-view with and like snuggle and watch a movie together. Kids are just kind of watching it in the palm of their hands. So it's a little harder to monitor. So it's changed how we study it, meaning we need to measure it in different ways that aren't just screen time. And I can talk a little bit about how we measure it and what that means for how we can parent around media. It also changes the amount of work we need to do as parents to try to help our kids' habits, screen habits, stay healthy. Because when you can take that screen into any place in your home or your car or any moment when you're feeling bored or frustrated, it can become something the child is dependent on and uses a lot, and that can start to crowd out other activities. So that's the big picture, is that technology is evolving really rapidly. That makes us feel more anxious as parents. Like, I just want to control it all, or I just want to give up and not, there's nothing I can do. And so I hope that we, tonight are talking with a mindset of, okay, this is hard. This is moving fast. I'm not always sure what I'm doing, but I can at least do my best to be curious about what my kids like, set some boundaries that reflect the goals in my family and our values, maintain the space to play with my kids and giggle with them and teach them about the outdoors and how to cook and all other stuff that matters to our family, and let tech have its time and its place in our family. There's still great fun uses of tech in technology in early childhood, which we can talk about, but with the main goal that it doesn't take over and it's not like the main thing your child loves to do.
Yeah. And I love this framework that you are bringing in, right? It's changing really quickly. We are doing our best. And I think that that way of approaching screen time and how we parent around it is so helpful. And of course, doesn't come from a place of judgment either, which doesn't ever help. I do want to get to those parenting strategies, and I do want to get to the positive aspects of screen time because there are some as well. But before we do that, I did want to ask you, Jenny, and it's something I wonder about as both a pediatrician and a mom, right? What does the data say about how excessive screen time impacts early childhood development? And I'm specifically curious about language and social skills.
Yep. Yeah, and just to build on your first thing, absolutely, the conversations we should be having about this shouldn't feel guilty or blame or shame, because that just makes you shut down and it doesn't make you feel like you can handle things. And to be honest, so many of these things, they're not in our control. They're determined and designed by these powerful, really wealthy tech companies that keep like spinning out new products that we haven't even asked for. So, give yourself the grace to say, okay, it's another new app or another new, activity my child wants to do. I need to adapt to this and figure out if it's right for my kid. So when it comes to screen use in early childhood, it's mostly been measured in terms of time. So how many minutes per day is a child using screen media? And the research across many, many studies has shown correlations between more time on screens and lower language ability, so language delays, as well as more behavior problems like tantrums or kind of falling out or not being able to wait for things, as well as sleep problems. And sleep might be the cause of those behavioral problems too. Some of this goes both ways. So if you're a child with more behavioral difficulties, like some kids, it's just harder for them to wait or to handle an emotion. So those kids we know are given media more to manage their behavior or to calm down. So, right, it goes both ways, but overall, the research does show these associations between screens and developmental delays, except if kids are watching high quality educational media, then there's no link with developmental delays. So that's really interesting because that means, okay, if you're a 2-year-old watching Sesame Street, watching PBS Kids, that's a much richer developmental experience because they hired psychologists to learn how to create for kids and really teach them at their level. They have more call and response or these other kind of nice ways of teaching young kids. It's not like, I mean, I've seen my research lab studies YouTube, and some of those videos are just like, bam, 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 bam. Like they're full of toys. They're full of just like, stuff to grab your attention, but not teach you. So that's the key is that if you are going to choose to use screens in early childhood, finding that quality stuff like from nonprofits like Sesame Street and PBS Kids is really important. It's free and it's not trying to make money off your kids. It's not trying to keep them on the screen longer, so those are the takeaways I have. There's also been a lot of the research is correlational, like I said, but there have been experiments where parents of preschoolers changed their child's content from more a little bit like aggressive or kind of sassy content, Power Rangers back in the day, like that's the sort of stuff it was. And they switched it to more pro-social content like PBS Kids. Those kids showed behavior improvements like on the scale that you would get from like an evidence-based parenting program from like having a therapist. Isn't that amazing that you can just switch the content, keep the same screen time, and you can see improvements? And that's because role modeling. Kids see someone doing something on a screen and they often mimic it or think it's okay. So if you're a parent struggling with your child's behavioral reaction to screens, switch up the content to something where you're like, oh, I love these characters. They're so kind to each other. They're doing such creative things.
I love that. And tell a friend, right? As you are learning about this and as you are experiencing this in your own home, tell your mom friends, tell your other pediatrician friends, right? So that we can all be spreading this information. I love it.
Love that. That's the antidote to the judgment, right? Is like, hey, I just saw this thing. It really worked for my kid. I love that parent to parent guidance too.
Yes, 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 yes. We need it in this moment in time. Zach, I also wanted to ask you a little bit about the data and the research on young children's mental health as it relates to screen time and what we know and don't know in this moment in time.
Yeah, I so appreciate you having me, and it's so exciting to be a part of this. A lot of what I'm going to say is actually very similar to what Jenny just outlined. I do think it's helpful to take a step back and acknowledge that while there is some research, we still need a lot more research to better understand sort of the risks, the consequences, and the recommendations as it relates to screen time. And I'll focus on really mental health in that area and sort of allow other folks to talk about their specialties with that. And that includes longitudinal data to understand over time how this will impact the mental health of young folks. The other piece that I think we need to acknowledge, which Jenny touched on so importantly, is that the technology is moving really, really quickly. And so researchers and healthcare providers and parents are having a tough time to even keep up with the technology, which means we're not necessarily getting the data and the guidance on how to respond. However, there is information to indicate that more screen time does likely influence a child's development and well-being as it relates to mental health. And I think the really important aspect that we want to think about is when screen time sort of replaces that important aspects of childhood functioning and that important aspect of replacing maybe growth and then impacts well-being. And so a couple of examples could be just when excessive screen time impacts face-to-face interaction, we're going to see that that's going to impact mental health. Physical play, that's going to impact mental health. Active exploration, sleep is a huge one, emotion regulation, right? And so there are studies that have looked at school-age kids and followed them for up to 2 years where they found more screen time really was tied to some depressive symptoms, as well as some behavioral issues, some sleep issues, and some symptoms of ADHD. So all that is to say that as screen time goes up, so does the risk that mental health issues will be present or be exacerbated, with the main issue that we want to focus on is making sure that excessive screen time isn't replacing the opportunity for growth, which will then impact well-being.
Yeah, I so appreciate the way that you're breaking that down, right? What we are replacing and then what the consequences are, right? I do also want to ask you, Zach, is there data to support potential causation, right, between excessive screen time and anxiety or ADHD or other mental health conditions? Again, knowing that there is definitely correlation, right, between those things as you just outlined, but is there data to support more of the causation aspect of this?
Yeah, great question. It's something that I think comes up a lot and for good reason. So maybe we can split up the two diagnoses between ADHD and anxiety. So just to be like very open and clear, regarding ADHD, there is not clear data to support the idea that screen time causes ADHD. There are some studies that suggest it, but we really need more robust data to come to that conclusion. So it's a pretty large conclusion. However, and to make it a little bit more confusing, there is data that supports that engaging in screen time activities can result in an increase or an exacerbation of symptoms that are very similar to ADHD, right? And so this is the idea that kind of fast-paced, stimulating nature of screen time can lead to behaviors that resemble ADHD, like inattention, impulsivity, and hyperactivity. So even to break it down further, we have a child who is on screen time on that Saturday morning from 7:30 until 11. We're allowing the parents to sleep in, and we as parents, we know we need that, right? So that child is getting pretty overstimulated by a constant bombardment of visual and auditory stimuli. And so if we remove that from them in that moment, we say, hey, go do a puzzle, go read a book, go outside and explore. They might find that transition and that task to be that much more difficult because they just spent 3.5, 4 hours on screen time. At the same time, if they're on screen that entire time, right, they're not engaging in any physical activity. So when screen time ceases, we might see children that are a little bit more impulsive, a little bit more hyperactive. And so there we see screen time has ended, and now I have a more hyperactive kid. I have a child that's more impulsive, maybe more inattentive and struggling in that moment. Do they really have ADHD? We think it's more likely a cause of engaging in screen time in that moment and not actually a clear diagnosis of ADHD.
Yeah, I love that. And I'll tell you, I can sort of relate to that on two levels. One, in my own home, when I take away the screen, it doesn't take very long for my child to be very angry about the fact that I took away the screen. And also, this is the importance of context and how much we do as pediatricians, general pediatricians like Maggie and I are developmental pediatricians like Jenny, and you as a clinical psychologist to really understand the full context of a family before we make a diagnosis, like say ADHD, right? And sort of understanding how all these other things are coming into play in the different contexts and the different settings becomes so important before we make that type of diagnosis.
Yeah.
I did want to ask you, and Zach, did you want to add anything else? It's
No,
totally
that's fine. Yeah.
all right, Maggie, I did want to ask you, I'm just curious, what are parents asking you? What are some of the most common screen-related concerns that you hear from parents in your practice? Are they even asking about this? And I'm directing this question to you as a primary care pediatrician on the panel because you see it all, right? You see the full range. So I'm just curious, what are parents asking when it comes to screen time?
Yeah, thank you, Edith. I think the vast majority of concerns come from parents of adolescents, and where it comes up is where it's impacting screen use is impacting an adolescent's ability to function. So sleep dysregulation is a big one I see. I have a lot of parents or caregivers that are concerned about how much screen time their adolescents are getting, how often they're on their phone, how often they're texting, DMing on their social media apps, and it's really difficult for them to put it away at night, and it's limiting their ability to sleep, affecting their school performance, affecting their ability to attend school. And so we see lots of downstream effects from that poor sleep quality. I also hear concerns from parents regarding what's going on that screen. So concerns particularly for adolescents around sexting or cyberbullying. And those are major concerns, which obviously have a huge impact on a teen's mental health and well-being. So those are the most common things that I see in my practice related to screen use, particularly from parents or caregivers of adolescents.
Yeah. And as a pediatrician, thinking about the consequences of excessive screen time and specifically in the younger age groups, what are you seeing as the most common, let's call them complications or consequences, right? Is it mostly vision problems? Are you seeing obesity problems related to children who are, again, not moving and the screen becomes, what crowds out other things?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest challenges with increased screen use across all age groups is just it limits your ability to engage in physical activity. It limits your ability to engage in play, which can definitely be a contributing factor to obesity. We know that obesity is multifactorial, lots of things, different things contributed to it, but for sure, decreased physical activity as a result of increased screen use can put you at risk for obesity or elevated BMI. I do hear from a lot of teens, particularly in school-age children, when they're using a lot of screens during school and then coming home and using screens to complete homework, and that they're having some eye strain problems. They get headaches from that. So we talk about taking breaks from screens when able to, but that's another common thing that I see.
Yeah, and I'll just add to that,
Yeah.
Edith, that I was talking with some preschool teachers yesterday who were talking about that they're having increasing difficulties getting kids kind of fine motor abilities and learning to shape their letters and write their names. So there have been a couple studies suggesting that more tablet use and using screens like on a TV is displacing, like as Zach talked about, the sort of play that kids do with their hands. And our fine motor abilities in our hands are shaped all through early childhood by playing with all sorts of textures and trying to snap snaps and trying to unbuckle things and putting together puzzles. And so that is one thing that I think parents could do if they feel like, I want there to be a healthy balance here. I like my kids to use some screen media during the day. But what else can you kind of put out for them to be doing that's hands-on? And also attention span. So if you're worried that your child is getting used to kind of watching video after video, having some other activities that they can do, that the ones that help stretch attention span, and this is what I coach my patients who are young kids who struggle with attention span, is shared book reading. So if you're a parent and can kind of make it kind of engaging and try to keep that attention span through the whole book, start with a shorter book and then slowly, gradually get a longer one. Tabletop activities that might be really motivating for the child, like Play-Doh, or coloring together, where your goal is you want to have start to finish, that they don't bail on you halfway through or get distracted by something else. And maybe they need a break to go wiggle or get a drink of water or something, but that you're able to work on something. Now, of course, if you have a 2 or 3-year-old, you're not sitting there for 15 minutes, like finish your coloring, but you want to have a few things where you're like, this is the only thing we're focusing on. We're just sitting here together and we are maybe, playing with this toy together, and it's just the thing that you and I are focusing on, because that's how kids build their focus and their attention span, is actually through, what is my mom focusing on? What is my grandma or my dad focusing on? Should I focus on that as well? So if we're focusing on our own screens, then we're also missing that opportunity to be working with them and be like, oh, little elephant wants to come over and play. All that kind of silly stuff that we do through play is actually a lot of important building blocks of kids' attention spans. So I wouldn't, I want parents to know play is like really, really effective at helping kids build all those skills you want them to have as they're entering school. And then to build upon that, one more thing. When you're a child in school and school feels hard for you, you can get sad and anxious. And that I see all the time is a precursor to anxiety and depression in kids. We want kids to feel effective at school. So the more we can set them up for that, and then if we realize they're struggling, we maybe get them a therapist or a little speech therapy or something else that really helps prevent against long-term mental health problems.
Yeah, I love all of this, Jenny, and it feels so intuitive to see the effects on our kids when we actually do this, right? Like I mean, you just see the changes in the room happen in front of your eyes when you put your own phone down, when you turn off all other distractions and just sit with your child to play. You see what happens, like you sort of see the magic. But sometimes it's helpful to hear it articulated, and it's helpful to hear also that there's data and there's studies about this, right? Like it's true. What you are seeing with your own eyes is in fact established science, right? So always helpful to hear that. Now, I do want to ask you, Jenny, and please keep sending us your questions in the Q&A. We will have time for them. We will make time for them. So please send them. I did want to ask you, are there any benefits? And, I'm almost sort of hesitant to ask this question because I, want to focus on strategies and again, the play and all these other things. But what are the benefits of screen time, potential benefits? And are there sort of, I guess, opportunities for education? And you touched on this a little bit earlier, but any known benefits so that we're not just focusing on the negative?
Yeah, so let's start with the youngest kids. Like number one benefit is using FaceTime to connect with loved ones. You're supporting relationships through media. Again, it's not like entertainment media. It's It's FaceTiming or other things that help you support an ongoing relationship. And then as kids get older, around 18 months to 2 years, kids can start learning from screens. Why can't they learn under 18 months? It's because an infant's brain doesn't yet think in terms of symbols. A symbol is something you see on a screen. I see a cat on that screen. I know that that represents a cat in real life. They can't do that yet because their brains haven't developed that sort of memory or flexibility. But once they do, around 18 to 24 months, research has shown that if they watch a well-crafted educational video, again, I'm not paid by Sesame Workshop or PBS Kids to say this, but they've actually studied their programs to show kids can learn words, kids can learn different concepts. Daniel Tiger's Neighborhood has been shown to, if a parent co-views together and sings those songs about feelings, it shows that kids show benefits in their social and emotional skills. So in early childhood, think high quality, and that is what has actually been tested to improve outcomes. Anything where you as a parent sit along and sing, talk, make jokes, and then try to transfer it to their world around them, that's going to be more educational. And it might help with transitions too. Transitions away from media are the hardest thing I hear about from families. So if you can sit for a little while at the end and just watch and say, oh, Curious George was playing with, that roll of paper towels. We have paper towels. Sorry, I'm making up terrible examples right now, but I just want,
Jenny, we're getting it. Keep going with it.
Yeah, no, like that is how you get a child to unstick their brain from the screen and move towards your home where you want to play with them. And then as kids get older, into the elementary school years, there's tons that they can do with educational technology like coding or learning from reading apps or other things. But again, the crucial thing is that tech product has actually tested that it works with kids. And it's not making these false claims of education, which unfortunately, they're everywhere. They're in the App Store, they're on YouTube. So parents really have to be pretty skeptical of anything that says, educational, because really it may not really be fully tested.
Yeah, Jenny, and along the same lines, right? I think you touched on this, Zach, you did as well. Not all content is created equal, right? The super stimulating, the auditory, the visual stimulation is a lot, and it's more than our kids' little brains can handle. In addition to being on the lookout for that type of content, is there any place where parents can go that can rank content, that can give suggestions on content by age, where parents can sort of get a handle on, oh, this has been tested, this is good, this is high quality content, and for different ages too?
Yeah, so Common Sense Media is the most comprehensive option for this. A lot of their reviews are free and their articles for parents are free. Some of them are behind a paywall, but there are options to kind of get a free account. So that's where I go the most, especially if my son is asking me, can we watch, some movie that seems a little bit mature? I can go and say, well, Common Sense Media says it's better for 16 and up, and you're 11. So that's a no. And you can blame them. But the other places to go is, I think, other parents, like you said, because, parents are pretty good judges. And then also trust your own gut. If you're watching along and you think, I don't really like how this character's behaving, or why did that kid influencer just tell my child to buy their merchandise, or why are there so many ads that keep popping up in the middle of this app? Parents should trust their own judgment, that if something is constantly trying to use their child to just sell them stuff, get them to watch longer, get them to click on ads, that is not worth your child's attention, and they can uninstall that. But if you like the messages and you feel like your child is learning from it, then keep doing it. There are some shows where you may feel like, wow, like my child is actually teaching me stuff after watching a show like this. That's a good sign. If you're like, oh, my child is begging for this new toy after every time they watch that, that's not a good sign. That's more that it feels like it's just an advertisement or trying to, manipulate your child.
Yeah, which is not cool, but unfortunately happens, right? Zach, I also wanted to ask you, and again, hopefully we are curbing this and we're going to talk more about strategies to reduce screen time, to counsel about it in our offices. But what are, from your perspective, some red flags that screen time is negatively impacting a child's well-being and mental health?
Yeah, I mean, such an important question and something for us to think about as healthcare providers and parents and really humans. I think the biggest one is that sort of increased irritability when we see the tantrums or emotion dysregulation when screen time is limited, or when maybe we're driving and we're out of the Wi-Fi area, or there's something going on and we see that sort of noticeable change in mood after prolonged screen use as well. So when there's that shift in screen use, and then we see the shift in the young child, that's sort of an indication that this isn't going well. And listen, that happens quite a bit, but we're talking about like a pretty significant response or reaction. It means that probably we're going to want to reduce that screen time. Sleep disturbance is an enormous one, and it's really tied to a lot of the mental health issues that are going on, not only for young children, but for adolescents, older adolescents, and even young adults, right? When the screens start getting in the way of sleep, that can really have an ongoing impact on multiple areas of mental health. And that's something to be concerned about. I already named this, but physical activity is so important for young children. It's important for their mental health, for their well-being. That's a component that when screen time's impacting physical activity, it's probably an indication that there's some problems there. Social interactions are being decreased because of screen time. We're going to want to do that. I'm sure we've all heard of funny stories and yet stories of when young children have hid their iPads. You go into the room, it's 3 a.m., and they're watching Daniel Tiger, hopefully nothing worse than that, right? And you're just thinking, okay, that's a problem. So any secretive screen use is problematic as well, and sort of an indication. Any academic problems, and for young kids, you're thinking like, well, what are the academic problems? If we're noticing that they're having issues with school, and it was so interesting to hear about that kind of fine motor piece, and we think that might be tied to excessive screen use, we're really going to want to reduce it. As well as I've heard a lot of issues around eating, where kids will eat very quickly or eat very little and say, I'm full, now can I go watch screens again? These are really indications that probably screen time is excessive at that point, and we need to recalibrate the system to reduce the amount of screen time.
Yeah, I mean, so many things to potentially be on the lookout for, but they all make a little bit of intuitive sense, right? If we're thinking about what kids should be doing and learning and how they thrive, right? Maggie, I did want to ask you, there's so much we can say if we have unlimited time in the office, or I should say, if we had unlimited time in the office, which we unfortunately do not, right, as primary care pediatricians. So how do you counsel in a way that doesn't feel judgmental, but is still helpful and realistic with the added challenge of very limited time?
Yeah, so this is always a challenge, never enough time in a visit. But I think the key thing, as you pointed out, is really approaching these conversations with families with no judgment. I think there's, as Johnny mentioned, as you mentioned, there's like so much guilt and shame around screen use. I think parents, we all feel guilty, and we've all been there before. And so just coming into these conversations with an open mind and really helping families come up with strategies to how to find replacements for screen time, or how to make screen time work for them. So I'm really pragmatic in these conversations. There's not a one size fits all approach. You have to meet the family where they're at. Getting a good history of how screens are used in the family, how the kids are using screen, how parents are using the screens can be really important. And that's going to guide your conversations with families around providing that anticipatory guidance. So the two things I like to focus on the most are the timing of screens, when are screens being used? So for teens, we've talked about this, already. It's come up several times, but sleep, it's a huge issue for our teens, is that the screen use before bedtime, that's impacting sleep. So if that's something that comes up in conversation where teens are saying that they're not getting enough sleep, or they're struggling getting to school on time, and you're learning that they're on their phone until 3 a.m., well, that's maybe a good time to work with strategies with them around keeping the phone out of the room, making the bedroom a no screen place, or even at least 1 hour before bedtime, moving it out into the kitchen to charge overnight, or setting limits on social media apps. Things like that can be really helpful. And again, whatever is going to work best for the teen and something that they can keep up with. For younger children, maybe you find that the screen has been on, or TV's been on all day, sort of like in the background noise. And that's something you can talk about with families too. We do know that, kids are going to be less interactive, less engaging in conversation when there is that background noise on. And so talking with families, it's great that the kids are engaging in free play. That's wonderful. Let's continue to promote it. But maybe it's not necessary for the TV to be on in the background during that time too. The other big thing is quality. So thinking about what they're watching. And I know Jenny has given a lot of great resources already, like Common Sense Media, that families can use and look at for looking at content. But it is really important that not all content is created equal, particularly for the younger kids. There's a lot of things out there and streaming apps that are just mind-numbing and attention-grabbing. So really, really working with families on recognizing what content is going to be educational or bring value to their children. And if kids have access to their own devices, setting those parental controls too, so that they're not accessing comments just by streaming or scrolling, or seeing content that's not age or developmentally appropriate for them. For the adolescents, I really encourage parents and caregivers to engage in conversations with their teens about what they're using, what they're on their phone for, and what they're engaging with and who they're engaging with on social media. It's a great opportunity to talk to your teen, build that relationship, find out what their interests are, and explore those with them. But it might also be an opportunity to talk about some of the concerns that we have about social media use, like the sexting or the cyberbullying or other risky behaviors, and create windows into having conversations with them about that. So that's not a one size fits all approach, but really kind of figuring out how the family is engaging and how patients and our kids are using screens, and then tailoring guidance around that.
Yeah, it's I'm so glad you're also bringing in that perspective of it's so different for every family, right? Like I'll tell you, and I'm also candid with my families lately, right? I'm like, yes, you're using a screen to be able to make dinner quickly. Been there. I hear you, right? So those times when we feel that the screen is needed is so important to understand. Along the same lines, we're actually getting some really, really good questions that speak to really the things that are coming up every day, right? As you're trying to navigate this world with your kids at home. I want to get to all of those in just a second. I did want to ask you, Jenny, you are leading a very exciting center through the American Academy of Pediatrics. And I was wondering if you can tell us, one, a little bit more about the center, and two, the types of resources that are available for both parents and pediatricians who are navigating this with parents.
Yeah, this Center of Excellence on Social Media and Youth Mental Health it's funded by the federal government through SAMHSA. So that's the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration. That's part of Health and Human Services that helps provide mental health, counseling, addiction, other sorts of services. And this grant was created to create resources for families based around the research evidence to help families navigate this really tricky topic with their kids. And the approach we've taken to it is we can't just take the screens away and expect everything to get better. There is so much else going on in families right now that are affecting their well-being. So we've really tried to nest all of our recommendations within a few ideas. One is every child is a little different, and there's different reasons and motivations that we use media with different kids. So in order to change media habits to make them healthier, we need to understand those underlying motivations. Is it to get dinner cooked? Which, I mean, our research suggests that having a a regular time of day where you occupy kids so you can get stuff done, that's not linked with behavior problems as much as if you're giving them a screen just any moment of the day, or when they're fussing, or when they can't calm down, that's more of a problem. And then, of course, if you're giving your child a screen to calm them down, that means as a parent, you're probably pretty stressed or don't feel effective at other strategies to help kids manage their emotions. So with all of our resources, we're trying to address, let's build those emotional skills at the same time that we change the media habits. We also are addressing not just kids' use, but parents' use as well, because, it's about role modeling for your kids and about disrupting some of the family interactions that help keep kids mentally healthy. When you have conversations every day and you listen to your kids about how school was or what they're going through, and then when they're little, that you're talking to each other and you're exposing them to a lot of language and your stories about your family and the world. We are also really trying to shine a light on how media design really affects our well-being. So what I mean by design is, does it have autoplay and an endless scroll? That sort of design feature keeps us on apps so much longer than something that's just like a show and then it's done. Or is it something like the sort of likes and streaks and other sorts of rewards that come with that are in games or social media, and recognizing the effect that has on our psychology? And could we turn those off or use media that has less of those rewards to help us not feel as as much of that sort of compulsive habit of needing to check all the time? And the fact that we really want to explain to families, tech companies make more money the more time we spend on their products. So that's why it is so hard for you to stop scrolling or for your child to hand that tablet over. It's not your fault. It is engineered that way. So if parents can understand, like this digital world is actually designed a lot of the time to grab our attention and hold on to it, you may need to come up with different tactics to say, I'm going to put my phone or these devices out of sight, so those notifications or other things aren't going to grab our attention. Or we are, going to take a break from the video game that's full of in-app purchases and other things that my child is asking for all the time. So helping families both be savvy about design and also to say very clearly, we need some regulation and some policy change in the US so that this is designed better and in a safer way, so parents don't have to work so hard, because this is a lot of work. So our center has a website, aap.org/social media, and that has tons of resources that include question and answers, where parents have asked us questions about screen use and kids' relationship with technology. It has a glossary of all the different tech platforms and what sort of safety features they have. It has conversation starters. One of the biggest things we heard from parents is, I don't know how to talk about this with my kids. This is such a cringy topic. My kid just thinks I'm going to take away their phone and I'm just going to yell at them. So we have a whole bunch of conversation starters or activities to do with younger kids. And then we also, have a lot of other ongoing like webinars or video series or other handouts that we really encourage people to use. One of the handouts for pediatricians is called the 5 C's. And we've already talked about this today, but first C, who's your child? Second C, what is the content? Third C, are they using media to calm? Fourth C, what is it crowding out? And fifth C, how are you communicating about it? So those sort of handouts are available for pediatricians to hand over. So if Maggie's in a super busy day and is like, I don't have 15 minutes to counsel you about this, but check out this resource because you might get some new ideas of making this healthier.
Yeah, yeah. We will absolutely, there's been a couple questions that have come in about will you send the links and will this recording be available, which makes me very happy because it means that it's helpful. We will absolutely send the links and the recording from this webinar will definitely be available as well. So don't worry if we're going a little fast to squeeze it all in, we'll definitely send that out. So I love that we have questions from parents in our audience. The first one is one that I have heard before in my practice, and I'm sure you all have as well. Zach, let's maybe start with you. This mom of a 5 and 7-year-olds, parentheses boys, thank you for specifying, says that she has slid the slope into allowing too much screen time. Do you recommend a gradual peel back or cold turkey? And is it normal to expect a little withdrawal period? They're really resisting our efforts to peel back. What are your
Yeah.
thoughts?
Well, I'm glad they're resisting because that means that they're typical kids and we're seeing the things that we would want to see from kids. In some ways, I'll defer to both Jenny and Maggie and you as well on if there's research to support this, but I don't see any reason why we wouldn't just do cold turkey. I would imagine that there could be some form of a withdrawal or sadness or even moments of emotion dysregulation. And that's why you've made the decision to peel it back. But I don't see any reason why to say, hey, this is the new rule. I would sit down with your children and have an open conversation while you're doing this. I would validate why they might feel angry about this or why it's different than other homes. And I'd really be warm and empathic while also saying, this is the new rule. This is the way it is. We love you very much and we're starting it tomorrow. Right. But I think that would be appropriate way and want to empower you to make that decision. And if that's right for your family, then I would support doing that.
Anyone
Yeah,
use it?
I think then also, so that you can stay consistent with that new rule, is you're going to have to find things to fill that time. So it might be, okay, we're not watching, not playing these video games anymore. In the mornings, we're going to cook breakfast together and then we're going to go for a walk, or we might do other family activities. Maybe we're not playing video games, but maybe you can watch a soccer game in the morning. Like, so there might be things that you might shift and say, you know what, this is getting a little out of hand. We're arguing about it all the time. I love Zach's idea of have a little family conversation where you explain your thinking. That's how kids learn digital literacy, is that if we explain, hey, sometimes these technologies take over and sometimes they become the only thing we want to do. You're building insight into your relationship with technology by having that conversation and helping them realize, okay, a week later, 2 weeks later, check in. How did that feel? We're spending all this more family time together, or, we're doing this instead of all this video game time. How's that feeling to you? What do you miss about video games and what's better? And finally, the only thing I've heard in terms of cold turkey that has led to negative things is a teenager with their phone. So if you are saying, I'm done with this, I'm taking away your phone, some teenagers have become, have made suicidal statements after their phone goes away because a variety of reasons. Maybe they have a mental health issue. They may be just expressing how deeply uncomfortable they are with separating from their friends or other, they see their phone as this real contact to their peer community. And when you're a teenager, your friends and your peers are so, so important to you. And it also means that if you're like, I'm just taking that phone away, that's it, you're punished. That means as a parent, you probably feel out of control too, because you've kind of done the extreme thing. And so that's also why it may be a pretty intense moment. So instead, let things calm down and say, I want to talk about what's becoming a problem. Everybody develops a problem with their phone at some point where it feels too compulsive or it's getting out of hand. Hey, kid, what would you like to fix? What would you scale back if you could? Or I'm worried someone's bullying you. I'm worried someone's messing with you. Let it be a conversation where they contribute some ideas of how they want to uninstall an app or put on some new well-being settings. Something else where they're part of the solution is usually better than as a parent you controlling all of it.
Thank you for that.
In the teen years, absolutely. When you have a 5-year-old, you can say, this tablet's taking a vacation for a while.
Yeah. So this 5 and 7 year old mom of 5 and 7 year olds can definitely feel hopefully empowered to do that. Not that we're saying it's going to be very fun, but hopefully you are empowered by that. Maggie, what are your thoughts on screens that are running in the background? Any considerations for the TV that just runs all day when parents are coming in and they're saying, oh, but the baby doesn't watch it?
Yeah, so I think when TVs are on in the background, it can definitely limit a child's ability to engage in conversation with you or to limit their ability to engage in interactive play with you. So the fact that they're doing free play is amazing, and I always like applaud families for like promoting free play in their home and encouraging their kids to do that. But I think that the background noise is not necessary, and it just limits the opportunity for kids to engage. So if that, if it can be turned off, that's great. I understand. I think what one of the questions was about it being a caregiver or grandparent with TVs on in the background. And I know that's always another hard conversation to have when it's not in your own home and you don't make all those own rules. So those are things that you have to navigate and tread lightly, for sure. But as much as you can get kids talking with you while they're engaged in play, that's great.
Yeah, love it. Jenny, a couple of rapid fire questions. Are video games, I guess, presumably because of their interactive nature, any better than passive screen time?
So, even just watching a show doesn't necessarily mean it's passive. You can think a lot. Even if you're a baby, you might be doing a lot of cognitive work while you're watching something if it's educational. So, let's differentiate just a viewing of something educational where your brain is actually thinking and working. You could just be viewing a stream of ASMR or like slime videos, and then your brain is probably a little checked out and zoned out, which is not, an ideal state for kids while they're watching TV, that it's just something where they tune out. When you're playing a video game, there's a lot of strategy that you might be doing, that you might be kind of thinking ahead and planning and, collecting different things. But again, it depends on the design of that game. If it is a game where, I don't know, I've studied some Roblox games at times that can sometimes just feel like a loop of I'm collecting gems and then I'm spending them. I'm collecting gems and I'm spending them. Like it sometimes is a bit, as we call, closed loop, repetitive. If you're playing a repetitive game like that, we've downloaded plenty of them from the App Store where you're like, I'm just going to slide this thing into that bowl and press a button and pop these bubbles. That is not as mentally stimulating as a game where you're actually thinking and needing to strategize. So I hope that helps. Again, I want parents to trust their judgment, that if they see a video game that they're like, oh, this is pretty interesting, then trust your judgment. There's tons of really cool video games out there. And then there's other ones that are kind of repetitive and not always, they might be satisfying to play, but not especially educational.
Yeah, I love that. Jenny, also for you, are there special considerations, and you as a developmental pediatrician can, definitely tell us about this for children with autism, around the use of screen time? And are there specific unique harms or potential unique benefits?
Great question. And I've learned so much from my patients and their parents about what seems to help them have a healthy balance. Number one is at the time of diagnosis, we try to talk to families about having a plan about when and how media is going to be used in their child's life, because media can be a really restricted interest of kids with autism. I have some patients who watch, train video after train video on YouTube, and that they'd love to do that all day, but that would displace and get in the way of social, skill building, playing with people, and all the sort of interactions you need to build language and social skills in autism. we all need some time to have fun with the things we like to watch, but really having some clear boundaries around it and a time and a place for it. And then many kids might have like a talker or like a communication device, and just making sure that that communication device does not have all the fun apps on it too, that there's like a fun play device and that there's like a separate communication device so that they don't get distracted on it. And then finally, when kids who have autism are a bit rigid, it can be hard for them to transition away from media a little bit more. So again, that's where you might want to have a visual schedule of like where media is going to be in your day. Use a lot of first this, then this to help kids transition, and recognize when, okay, this is becoming their main interest. They're not interested in other things. And that holds for all kids, where you want your kids to have a range of different interests and activities, and they may love your pets or outdoors or coloring or something else, just so that, you know, I've talked to lots of families who feel like, oh, we've kind of gone down that slippery slope of like, now this is pretty much all he does in the afternoon, and then you peel it back. Some pluses of interactive media during when you have kids with autism is if you're doing a sing-along video and gesturing together, and lots of kids respond really well to music. So you can use a few kind of sing-along music videos where you're learning to do Itsy Bitsy Spider or heads, shoulders, knees, and toes. But then play along with them and do it alongside them, not just let them watch those videos themselves.
Yeah, I'm hearing, I think all of you have mentioned at this point the importance of that co-view and co-playing, and really how much it can go a long way for kids. Zach, slightly different topic for you, but how do you recommend that we protect kids or guide kids around watching TV, specifically when it relates to news and hard news? I feel like these days you turn on the TV and there's a number of different things that can come on at any given time, right? So how should we think about that differently?
Yeah, such a good question. And certainly when you have children who are predisposed to be anxious, or children who are anxious, or children who aren't anxious, if they're on an iPad and they accidentally click on the New York Times link or another link and a video comes on, some of these videos are pretty graphic and pretty serious. And the information related to sort of mass violence, natural disasters, excuse me, global warming, all of this information can be way too much for children at certain ages. And it's really not meant to be given to those kids at that age. So you want to be really mindful of making sure if they are getting this content, the content is really developmentally appropriate, right? And I didn't say chronologically appropriate because some kids at certain ages can sort of take in this information and process it, and it becomes adaptive and helpful. But for other kids, they're just not ready for it. And I've heard colleagues talk about, oh, for teenagers, it's okay for them to be on this news app, be on this. I don't always agree with that. If you have a really anxious child, we might want to think about what information they're getting and how they're getting the information. And it's not about censoring the information or completely blinding them from what's going on. It's more about how that's delivered. And I think you got to be really mindful of that. And for the most part, I do feel like a lot of the news that's out there with the videos and the audio, it probably is too much. And you just want to be really mindful of who your child is and what's going on for them. And for that situation, similar to what just was talked about with autism spectrum disorder, you have a really anxious kid, you're kind of bound to be really mindful of what information is coming in as it relates to news and current events.
So important to be aware of who your child is and where they are, right? And their development and their ability to digest some of these things. Super quick, we have about a minute left, but I wanna get to some of these really good questions that have come in. Maggie, thoughts on ebook versus a real book?
I defer to Jenny and Zach if they have some data on this, but I think your fact that your kid's reading and engaged and on an ebook, I think that's great. I think I'm all for ebooks. If it's easier for kids to read and they enjoy using their ebook, I'm all for it. So
Yeah, love it. And then Jenny, go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, it's as kids get older, ebooks are really not terribly different from print books if they're designed well. When you're littler, it's harder to share that ebook because they just want to hold the tablet. So it's hard to snuggle the same way that you can around a print book.
Yeah, I love it. I think we actually got to most of the questions. I hope that this was helpful. Thank you to everyone who joined this evening. We will be sending an email with the webinar link to register for March 27th. Please mark your calendars. It's going to be great. It's going to be on early intervention and also early childhood development. So March 27th, mark your calendars. Thank you again for joining us this evening. Thank you to our amazing, amazing panelists. We will be uploading this to YouTube and sending you the link, and we will send out the links to all of the resources that we talked about, including the AAP Center of Excellence. Thank you all so much. Have a lovely evening.